Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bill Brenner of Cyber Risk Alliance and SC Media, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this panel cast sponsored by Quokka. Joining me is Chris Gokul, VP and GM, Public Sector and APAC for Quokka, Jonathan Trimble, CISO at FCS Financial, and Solomon Yuga, Director of Governance, Risk, and Compliance for Rockwell Automation. And we are here to discuss the implications of the TikTok ban on the future of mobile and application security. But first, some quick housekeeping. If you have a question, please select the Q&A button right below our heads. And I will be keeping an eye on that. And when I see your questions, I will break in and ask them. Comments are also welcome, sharing your experiences. And also be sure to click the handouts button. That's the circle with the little rectangle inside of it. And that will take you to some content that Quokka has made available. And if you don't see that, just refresh your screen and then it will appear. And with that, welcome everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Chris, I'm gonna start with you. Talk, if you can, about the specific concerns that led to, this potential ban of TikTok and how credible these threats are from a cybersecurity standpoint.
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, as a quick background for those listening in, Quokka has been tracking this application and a larger set of applications by the developer ByteDance for, going on about 7 or 8 years now. So I'll give you a little bit of a historical perspective as this ban has evolved, starting really in 2019 and beyond. So, the primary concerns, at least in the public media that we have from U.S. government and other congressmen, congresswomen that have spoken about this, is the collection of data of U.S. citizens and the sending of that data to China. And from that perspective, geopolitical questions aside, there has been historical legitimacy to this claim. Of course, ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, is a Chinese enterprise. And when we first started tracking this application, as it was acquired by ByteDance from previously it's called musical.ly, the terminations of the connections from the TikTok application running in the US were going straight into mainland China, meaning every picture you loaded, video you loaded, something you uploaded, tracking data about you, about the user, all of that data was going directly to mainland China. Now, after the political pressure started being applied early 2019, a shift was made in that year to terminate those connections in the west coast of the US. So instead of going straight to China, the connections were now terminating in the US. Well, of course, who knows if that's where the data stopped flowing, but at least from the application perspective, that's where the data was sent first. So from that perspective, TikTok does have a historical legitimacy to that concern, as well as the location of the owner of TikTok, ByteDance. And then beyond that, on the level of access that it asks for on a typical end user device, we do see that the level is above average in terms of its similar competitor applications and other top applications in the market. It's in general asking for more things from you, either directly through those pop-up permissions or indirectly through the system, where things it doesn't have to ask you for, it just asks the operating system for. And in general, it does ask for more than the other comparable applications. We got some slides to go a little bit deeper into that in a minute, but I think I'll stop there and let my co-presenters jump in.
Yeah, so Solomon, I'll move over to you and just ask you for you, in your role, what are the unique concerns when it comes to TikTok and everything that we've seen in the media over the last 4 years plus about this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, so when it comes to TikTok, the concerns are not just technical, it's also cultural because there is a generational shift of internet users who want to share everything about their lives and their current location and what they are doing. And so, but in the course of sharing that data, sometimes they share some information that could be used to infer some other confidential information. If, for example, you were sharing information about a dance move, but you were standing right in front of a nuclear reactor, so that in itself has some intelligence intelligence implications. And of course, every intelligence branch would have people on those applications trying to collect seemingly publicly distributed information as much as possible. And on the enterprise side, yeah, as you begin to hire more people from the younger generation, and you have to deal with the tendency to share and overshare, there is a concern that corporate information, customer information could get caught up in all that sharing. And if you're dealing with an entity that is tend to be a higher present a higher national security risk, it makes risk managers sit up and try to estimate how much of a concern TikTok is, not just the application itself, but how your employees and your partners were using that application within the enterprise. So that's where I think most number one things that will concern most CISOs, the habits of the people and the entity in concern, because it's it's just whenever you hear about data flowing to mainland China, everyone has a concern about that. So
Yeah.
I think that's where it will come from in the corporate space.
Yeah. So John, you're in the financial space, and a lot of what Solomon was just talking about, I've heard from CISOs across all walks. Anything that you would add to that, or anything that you would have a different perspective on?
I think I would add that this proposed ban of TikTok is not a standalone effort. And so since 1950, the federal government has had what they call the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. That's CFIUS for short. And what this committee did is they examine different purchases by foreign entities and give their input whether the U.S. should allow that, if the federal government should allow it or not, or if there needed to be alternate arrangements made. And this usually when centers around maybe properties or telecommunications equipment or ports, things like that, where it has strategic nature. And so the committee is made up of 16 members of the federal government of different agencies like Department of Justice, Department of State, DOD. They're unanimous in their decision that TikTok really could not continue as being a Chinese-owned entity. And the reason this has become so public, though, is I think the first time you have 170 million users that are being affected. And so that, if you're blocking the sale of a telecommunications company or switch, it doesn't affect a lot of people. But in this case, it's become a lot more public. And sometimes people don't understand quite what the implications are, what the motivations are behind the ban. And then also for another national security perspective is Gartner identified emerging threats for these coming 5 years or so. Misinformation is one of the largest threats. And so not only the information being provided over to China, but what they can do to push that back and basically send messages to a large swath of people and provide undue influence on how this country operates.
Mhm. Now, Chris, from a technical perspective, what are the main security vulnerabilities that TikTok presents? So we've just been talking about what we consider to be the wider risks, but what are some of the specific security vulnerabilities, and how can these be mitigated in similar applications? Because this is really about more than TikTok. It's about a lot of different apps where, as Solomon put it, people want to share every part of their lives.
Yeah, definitely. And, that's the message that we are constantly spreading here, Guaca, is TikTok, the ban in itself may have good justified reasons, as John just mentioned. But, TikTok alone is not the only application made by a Chinese company, distributed on the Apple and Google stores in the US and used by tens, if not hundreds of millions of people. And when we're looking at, ByteDance and TikTok, there's a couple different, angles to answer your question directly. So starting with TikTok itself, in 2018, I mentioned we were tracking those connections back to mainland China. But another interesting thing that we found was TikTok actually was asking for some data, not from you, the user, but from another application on your device. So typically, as an end user, you would expect, if this app wants to access my camera, it will ask me and I hit allow. But on the Android platform specifically, there's ways for apps to share data directly without notifying the user. So you could install one app that accesses your camera, you could install another app that accesses your internet, and they could share those permissions directly with each other without disclosing it to the end user or without disclosing it to the operating system. Meaning, the protections that you think you have in place a lot of times, like your privacy dashboard, this app has access to this app has access to that, those may not and are not accurate in 100% of cases. So for TikTok, we saw that it was asking for the notifications that you get on your device from a third-party application. So if you had this other app on your phone and it already granted that permission, TikTok could also ask for that data. And what shows up in your notifications? Well, every text message you get, who sent it, a short summary, every call that you get, every email that you get, even your Signal and Telegram messages get decrypted when they're shown in your notification shade. So all of that data could potentially be collected by them back in 2018. And at the time, we disclosed this through Politico, who reached out to them, and they claimed or responded that they didn't know why it was there and that they would remove it. But it did take, I think, about a year in total for that permission to be removed from the application. And so that's one example of something that we've seen for TikTok specifically. But, wider spread, if we're looking at the, landscape of applications, other similar applications that are out there in the market, we can see here on this slide that, TikTok in itself, I said it's above average in the number of permissions that it requests from you. And that's true. But you'll notice there's two other applications in this analysis at the top of the App Store that are asking for more. And in our chat previous to this panel, Solomon brought up, what about Meta? What about these other social media companies? And though I can't tell you exactly which ones those are on that list, I will tell you that those other social media companies are asking for similar amounts of information to TikTok. So, whether they're Chinese-owned, US-owned, EU, these applications out there, it's not just TikTok that are trying to collect a lot of data about end users. And of course, as Solomon mentioned, end users are willing to give up a lot of data as well to these applications. So it's not always the negative side there, let's say. And then for security, in a similar perspective, TikTok is in that top 10 of applications that we looked at. But you'll notice it's far more secure, at least in this diagram, than the first three applications in that list. And two of those are other popular social media apps made outside of the US, distributed across tens or hundreds of millions of users that aren't getting attention with this ban. So I think the short answer is, TikTok does have its problems. It has a history of issues that we have seen and found ourselves, and I'm sure others have found others. But there is a wider world here in the mobile space where there's not enough attention being paid to app number 1 or app number 2 or even app number 8 on that list that are sitting right there alongside TikTok in the App Store.
Now, before I get additional response from John and Solomon, there's a question here from the audience, and Chris, I think you're the appropriate one to address it. This individual asks, how are they getting the key to decrypt the ciphertext?
I'm thinking this is in response to the Telegram and Signal comment. So they actually don't have to. In that previous, the access for the notifications, if you think about when you receive a new text or a new Signal message on your phone, in your notifications, it shows up decrypted. So if you access it there, you don't need to break the encryption. It's already decrypted. So that's how the information is possible to get.
Got it. Now, John, any as you look at the slide and listen to what Chris has had to say about the broader issues, anything jump out at you in terms of what you have had to be mindful of as a CISO of a financial organization?
Yeah, I think one of the things is making sure that we know what apps are installed on the devices that the company is on the company's network, and regularly reviewing that to make sure that those software or applications don't present security vulnerabilities. And that requires a regular review of going across the system and seeing what's out there, because oftentimes users will download things not thinking it's a security risk, but of course, the security department might have a different perspective on that. And then having those things that do present a security risk be removed. It's an ongoing, it's always an ongoing issue. That's why we recommend that we regularly look across the system, make sure we don't have unauthorized applications.
Solomon, any thoughts?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, I totally agree with that position. I mean, we have this situation where corporate data and personal data are cohabiting on this device, and the device may have policies that are subpar. So I think security departments need to be mindful of how they expose or deliver corporate data on the media channel. So if you've got to have some form of mobile application management so that you are able to containerize all your corporate data and set the rules by which you want those that data to be consumed. In as much as unless there are companies that hand out actual phones to employees and say, hey, here is the phone you're going to use for everything relating to our company. But in most cases, you don't give out phones. You want to just have a container where you publish your company applications. So I think we need to pay some attention to all these software providers that provide all these mobile application management solutions to see how they deal with these cases of oversharing. And the one thing that people have not been able to resolve is the issue of, even if you block everything and people use their cameras, what can they share with their cameras? How do they use their cameras within a corporate workspace? And if there is any confidential information that an adversary can infer by what your users are sharing. So there is an aspect of threat intelligence where your security guys are trying to glean from public sources anything that may have bled out from your organization through the mobile channel.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. So, Chris, I'm going to swing back to you and ask, does a ban truly protect the public from the most concerning cyber threats in mobile apps? And I know the slides that we have up can illustrate some of this, but talk to that. Are we talking real change for the better, or?
Yeah, so I think, the ban, since it's specific to TikTok in this case, let's focus on that first. And this next slide here illustrates the problem that the ban doesn't address. So I think the short answer is no, but I'll give you a little bit more depth here.
Hmm.
The parent company ByteDance, of course, offers many different applications. There's another app called CapCut that is used for editing TikTok videos. That's also published by them. I don't believe is affected by the ban, but maybe. It's also extremely popular. But beyond that, ByteDance themselves distribute pieces of code on the open library sharing network called Maven, and
Hmm.
these allow other apps, non-ByteDance apps. It could be a U.S. developer, international developer, it doesn't matter. They can leverage these pieces of code to more quickly build their own app. So let's say they have built a game and they want a way to monetize it quickly. Well, ByteDance has a monetization library where you can add in ads to your game and start getting paid for them. So through these pieces of code, ByteDance has actually got a much wider spread across the App Store than just TikTok, CapCut, and their own applications that they publish. They're actually spread throughout a ton of other applications that are not ByteDance related in terms of the core developer. So in order to look at this issue, we took a sample set of around 10,000 applications in the Apple and Google stores and looked for traces of those ByteDance, what we call SDK, software development kits or libraries inside them. And in that sample set of 10,000, we found over 3.6 billion downloads between them. So the current estimation on Google's store right now is over 1 billion downloads for TikTok globally. Through these other applications, they may have 3 to 10 times, who knows how many more footprints on your device than just TikTok. So that's 10,000 apps that we looked at out of 3.5 million in the store. So, banning TikTok and, stopping users from giving their information directly to the TikTok application will have some impact. But through these other ways, there's a lot more data flowing to that corporation that is targeted by this ban than through TikTok alone. So it won't address, that capability that organization has throughout our mobile fleets.
So anything, Solomon and John, anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like putting your finger in the overflowing dike where,
Right.
the water's coming through and we're trying to stop this one leak, but it's coming through somewhere else. And I think from a corporate security perspective, we're always looking at software and where did it come from, how was it built? And I think that's one of the challenges that we have is determining if someone wants a new tool or software application, what's the origins of it? And that's really kind of difficult to determine. Because they could have pulled it out of open source code and cobbled it together. And the question is, did they test it? Did they use secure coding practices? Sometimes people ask me, hey, can I use this tool? And I'll do some research on it and look like it was built in someone's garage or something just from looking at the website. And they don't have that ability to do the secure code or adhere to a compliance framework. So I think one of the things that what we're always looking for is someone adopting secure coding practices. Do they do the testing of the code, and do they comply with some type of framework and do they provide that information to the potential clients? That gives us some reassurance that that the software is safe to introduce to our systems. But that's always something that we look pretty hard at from a corporate security perspective.
Solomon, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I can also add, if you look at the issues with the just the vast amount of data that all the social apps are trying to collect, it's not really a vulnerability, it's the feature. That's the operating model. And so the TikTok ban was not trying to address that operating model. It was trying to address a geostrategic risk. So I wouldn't say it moved the needle much in terms of mobile security. But what it has done is brought that issue to the front of the house, where every serious risk manager in a corporate organization has to decide, do we ban TikTok on our mobile applications? Mobile applications. So that's what it has done. And then it has actually shone the light on the amount of ubiquitous data collection by the large social media networks. And as much as the legislation didn't address what they are collecting practices, and because it's exactly their business model, it just talks about where the data goes to. And so from a corporate perspective, you want to check your software composition. Be sure that you are not sitting on a strategic risk just because this piece of code came from an untrusted country. Now, you may trust it. Maybe they actually went through all the proper security testing, but do your customers trust it? Do your suppliers trust it? Right. So there's also the reputational aspect where you can tell your customers, we do not have any code from China. That helps your sales, right? So that's kind of what you have to weigh, because even if TikTok has very excellent security practices, the mere fact that it's already up in the news can affect your product sales. So that's just one perspective.
So quickly from the audience, the question, is there an app that has a higher risk that makes you lose more sleep than TikTok? And so Chris, then John, then Solomon on that one.
Yeah, sure. I'm not going to call out any specific names, but I'll talk more a general example here. So I'm a iOS user, and I've obviously used my phone for almost everything, as everyone does these days. Even doing something that you would think impossible 15 years ago, 20 years ago, digitizing printed documents. So I got a business card at a conference. Let's scan it in. Got a printed PDF. Someone hands me a piece of paper. I don't want this paper. I'm going to turn it into a PDF so I can have it on my computer and my phone. So there's a very popular app that's targeted for this, also developed by a Chinese corporation that is the most popular app for this service in the App Store. And if you just take a quick peek at behind the scenes, again, data going straight to mainland China. And if you look at the privacy policy, it states that everything that you scan in, we will collect. Not we can collect, but we will collect. So there are millions and millions of Americans, using this application, scanning in everything from work documents to personal things to business cards, sharing data directly back to the same place, TikTok was back a few years ago. That is kind of flying under the radar, doesn't get as much attention in the news because it's not TikTok, not a social media app, but something that may have even a larger impact, in my opinion.
Yeah, TikTok definitely has that higher profile because of the geopolitical situation we find ourselves in with China. So, Solomon, any thoughts on that question from the audience about what besides TikTok? Any that stand out for you?
Yes, there's a particular social media company. I won't call their name. My concern around them is because they have tentacles in just every aspect, right? So the mobile records, your location positioning, your online behavior. So just because of the breadth of their collection, they can actually reconstruct every area of your life. And this is not this is not the most dangerous part of it. It's the fact that there is a way, because they understand you very well, they can build psychological profiles around you, and then they can do like a reverse where they are now influencing you because of that psychological profile, like an internet of behavior kind of thing. And they are able to do this because their collection capacity covers almost every aspect. And if you use the applications, they want you to link this one, link it to this one, link it to that one. So when you link it across all these four spheres, they can have a clearer picture about the person and where you work, what you do. And because they now do this, they can now be predictive and predict what's going to happen next. And they can now be influential because they can use your psychological profile to influence how you react to a certain thing. So that particular application is my biggest concern. They just have everything.
Yeah, and you can limit that by restricting some of the permissions of your apps that you use. An example is like only providing location data when you're actually using the app. If you leave it on all the time, location data is of tremendous value to data brokers and advertisers because they can develop a pattern of life of where you go, and they'll probably know more information about where you're at throughout the month than you do. And an example is you may buy dog food every 3 weeks and go to a certain store to do that. They'll see that pattern of behavior and start giving you ads 2 or 3 days before your dog runs out of dog food. And so it's that subtle advertising that you can be subjected to. So I think both when you download an app and looking at all the permissions that it's asking for, if it's asking for some permissions that don't make sense for that type of app, giving a second thought to that. Then also restricting the permissions of, if you don't need it, don't turn it off. And especially with location data, I would turn it off unless you're actually using that application.
Yeah, exactly. And in the corporate space, I would say security folks need to actually clamp down on shadow IT. And shadow IT is taking a different form from what we used to know back then. Because now every tool, every solution can be delivered across the web. So the things that you will have had to download a tool and install a solution to do, now there's a website that says, just post it up here, we'll get it done for you, we'll merge it for you, we'll do it for you. So shadow IT is now much, much easier to pull off. And that's where they can collect all the data from, because then they know where your laptop is connecting from. So the solutions that we deploy, the controls we deploy to deal with shadow IT has got to change, because there's an AI tool or there's an extension, the Chrome extension that can do all this stuff, and they will not install anything, but your data is still going out.
So Chris, I'm going to circle back to you with this next question. So we're going to pivot a little bit. We've been talking about the overall threat, and now we're going to focus more on the what to do about it. And so with that in mind, Chris, what are some best practices that security teams should follow to enhance mobile and app security in light of potential data privacy and security risks like those discovered in TikTok?
Yeah, sure. So I think we can hitch right off of some of the comments John and Solomon just made about the data advertisers and other data conglomerates can really gather about you. Being mindful about that, not only as security leaders, but spreading that message to our employees and families and others that are using mobile applications but might not be aware of these threats, I think is the first step. We think about what specific companies like Google can do for us on the advertising side, like Jonathan just mentioned. But, as we're using these mobile applications, if you aren't aware, there are a ton of players that are collecting data about you in these apps. So analytics providers, tracking providers, some owned by Google, some owned by Meta, some owned by, international companies. And these signals about our habits, our, personal networks, about our likes and dislikes, they're all going to these disparate places, some of which cannot be trusted. And we've seen examples in the past of attackers buying up this data and then using it back at enterprises as part of their spear phishing campaign. So, if I know that, Solomon loves Korean barbecue and he goes there on Thursdays with his friend, John, I can much more easily target him with a spam or a phishing link. Hey, $15 off your next visit to our restaurant. And these sort of things are thought of often in the advertising space, like Jonathan said, how did Google know I needed this? But in the security space, it does have implications in the workplace. So I think that education is the first step. And then, of course, as security leaders, you need to know what the applications are doing. So beyond, doing your own research, which is a great first step, who is making this application, what applications are on my network, which ones are obviously bad. There are that next step below of, what are these apps actually doing? Can I get an understanding of where this app is sending my data versus that app, how this app is using this permission versus that app, which ones have clear issues in terms of security issues that I need to address and which ones don't. So getting an understanding of that actual state of security of your mobile app fleet, I think, is a great second step there for enterprises as they are starting to deploy different mobile security solutions.
Solomon, anything you would add to that?
Yes, absolutely. So I would say you've got to. I am not advocate for contextual security, and what I mean by that is every organization has got a different operating context, and one company has like 90% exposure to the mobile security issues, and another company has none. So the security teams have got to have a very sincere and thorough review of their attack surface for the mobile space. And then once you know your exposure, you can begin to apply treatment. For all you know, you have nothing to worry about. Your organization just doesn't have that kind of exposure. And so for some, if your primary business model, it has to do with the use of the mobile channel, then you've got to actually do a detailed review of your attack surface and then see where the potential for loss is and apply effective controls. I guess that would give you a measure of control. There are some things that you really cannot do anything about. It's just the way the internet operates, and that's how data that's how data leaks. So you just have to then build controls to minimize those areas. And it's a risk management game. What risk can you sustain while making the most money for your organization? So I don't think it's going to be 100% shut down. Your risk managers will determine the cost-benefit analysis for the use of the mobile channel.
Jonathan, anything you would add?
I think just to add on is just, if we're downloading applications, to make sure that they stay within the lanes that we set up for them. This might apply a little bit more to software implication, but making sure that you trust that application only to the extent necessary for it to operate. If it goes beyond those bounds, that's just something that we would block that type of traffic or that type of data sharing.
So from the audience, to the point about understanding how apps are using permissions and what data they collect, with that in mind, the question is, so what is the first step to accomplish this? What tools exist to help members of the audience gather and determine that information and then help them assess the level of risk, followed by what remediation steps they ought to be taking? Chris, let's start with you there.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I swear he doesn't work for Quokka, but we offer some exact solutions to help you understand that. So, there's others in the market as well. So what we do is contextual app security intelligence. So we have a platform that takes in the apps that you download from the store, or the apps that you make yourself, or the apps that you sideload, any of the apps that you are using, and generates security, privacy, and compliance risk assessments of those applications automatically. So beyond, the store listing that it says it accesses your camera, location, etc., we can tell you, for example, where your location is sent with that application, or if it's saving your files, your camera, your pictures insecurely on your phone, or sharing them with another application on your phone. We're giving that picture down below, and we do that through kind of two core products. One product for developers that we call MAST, so that developers of applications, Army, U.S. government, large financial institutions that are doing most of their banking through apps, we help them secure their own app from this same lens. But for enterprise IT teams, enterprise security teams, we also offer a product called QScout, which either can be standalone or integrate directly with other solutions you already have, like a mobile device management system, mobile threat defense, or other, and feed in this risk intelligence to those platforms to allow you to make informed decisions. Because, if you're just basing it on the rating in the store and what the store says, you're going to be missing a lot of the threats that are in these applications. So the goal of our product suite is to arm you with that intelligence in order to make that informed decision. And as Solomon rightly said, the decision is going to be different for a small, medium business who has 10 employees than it is for the government or a large financial institution who has a lot more risk associated with their application or the data on their devices. So our main goal is to provide those different levels of organizations the information that they need to rightly respond in their context.
So,
Chris, do you see any difference between the different platforms as far as security between iOS and Android?
Yeah, very, very common question also. And the short answer is yes. There's different problems in the different platforms, though. So I think on the app level, the apps that you download from the store, or the apps that you develop, the problems are very similar, actually, between the two. Where they send data, how they use your data, how they secure your data. Apple and Google do a great job of giving developers a secure start, but developers can choose to be not secure on top of that. So we see, on Android and on iOS, same thing, people either misusing on purpose or an accident some of the features and leaving folks insecure. The interesting point here is on the device level. So on Android, as you may know, there's, hundreds, if not thousands of different manufacturers making Android devices, everything from phones to tablets, to smart TVs, to even cars now based on Android. And as part of that supply chain, apps and software are introduced, as you buy a chipset, from someone like Unisoc, they have an application that goes along with it to run at the system level. GPS, camera, other things. So in the Android space, the supply chain is much more complex and disparate as compared to Apple. And we see a lot of issues, added during that supply chain that come then preloaded on your phone. When you open it out of the box, these things are already in there. So from the top level down, the apps can misbehave, whether it's Apple or Android. But Android does have that more complex, supply chain and a number of distributors that makes that an additional risk on top of it.
So let me ask, how can organizations ensure compliance with new regulations and potential bans on mobile applications in the future? And Chris, I'm going to start with you and then followed by Solomon and then Jonathan.
Yeah, first step is understand what compliance regulations you want to follow or you need to follow for your industry. So I work a lot with our U.S. government partners, so I'll start there. In Department of Defense, it's very clear they have a compliance standard called the NIAP standard, National Information Assurance Partnership, that must be followed for DoD applications. So, everything is targeted towards that standard. How can I ensure that this app I'm developing or the app I'm downloading is compliant with that standard? So, obviously, you need the right tool to do that in an efficient manner. A big project that we went under with them a few years back is actually automating that compliance because if you're trying to, in the world of mobile, do manual review or manual pen testing for every app and every update, you're going to be 2 years behind in 2 days because there's so many new versions of these applications releasing on a daily basis, so many new applications being developed and added to the store that it simply outpaces the ability to do compliance the old way, the standard way. So getting yourself a tool that's fit for purpose that can, keep up with the rapid pace of change in the mobile space, and then understanding, what is the compliance standard that I am looking to follow. and does that tool support it? Is I think the first two steps.
Mm-hmm. Solomon?
Yeah, I'm going to add to that. Yeah, I would say you've got to have a very robust and reliable software composition practice during your build pipeline at the point when your developers are deciding what components they want to include in the application stack. They should know right there and then that this tool is not going to work just because it's coming from an untrusted source. So your software development lifecycle must have all that checks and gating built in. So, because you don't want to build the whole thing and then you have to rush back to make changes. So, as part of the build process, you must do a software composition analysis and determine at that point you can discover all the components that are risky or the components that come from an untrusted source. And also you may need to restrict people who can participate in your supply chain, especially if you're dealing with any defense aligned industry or partner. They'll tell you up front that they've got restrictions on who can be in your downline. And so you've got to think about this ahead of time before your product comes off the shelf.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I think probably staying up to date on the changing regulatory environment. We're just seeing more regulations roll out from the government these past couple of years, and I think that's probably going to continue. Even if you're in a non-regulated sector, regulation may be coming, and so probably just starting to look at what are those common, even if it's not mandated at this point. Look at GDPR or the California Consumer Protection Act. They cover data privacy concerns. Most likely, if there are regulations in the future that come out, there'll probably be some type of iteration of those regulations. But it is also looking a little bit over the horizon. We are seeing more regulations come out from CISA. Is probably the latest proposed rule that's going to be coming out. Doesn't necessarily talk about data privacy, but I think that's kind of what we can expect to be coming over in the future.
So in what ways can solutions from companies like Quokka help bolster mobile and app security defenses against similar threats? And Chris, I'm going to start with you there because Quokka is name dropped.
Yeah, so just piggybacking off of some of the recent points, from the developer perspective, when you're doing that software composition analysis, us and others like us, but I'll talk about our solution, MAST. It's mobile app security testing, integrates directly into that developer supply chain, developer DevSecOps supply chain. So as soon as you finish a build, whether it's the first build of your app or the last, it can go through an automated analysis and test against those security, privacy, and compliance checks. And often lost in this space is the difference between looking for known vulnerabilities and looking for behavior and unknown or 0-day vulnerabilities. So, it's great to check for those libraries, see who owns them, and see if they have any CVEs in them. But that's only giving you, a certain depth of information. We saw in 2020, even the U.S. Army in their mobile app supply chain introduced a library that was a Russian state-owned corporation that had essentially gotten inside the U.S. Army and a few other U.S. government applications because it wasn't publicly known that company was Russian. It didn't have any public information. There was no CVE, but the behavior of that library indicated that they were potentially Russian state-owned. So looking beyond the known issues into the unknown is what our MAST solution allows you to do, because it actually tests that code that you package into your app. Instead of just testing the code that you write, it also tests everything else in practice, not only scanning for the known issues. So I think that's a key key addition to the space that we bring. And then again, on the Q Scout side, as we call it, for the enterprise security or IT teams, bringing that same level of intelligence to every application that's on your network through our automated solution. So you don't have to do manual inspection across all potentially 10, 20,000 applications deployed across your company. You can just be alerted of the ones that fail your own compliance or policy automatically. So that's really what we bring, is the automation and the deeper intelligence to the space, both on the developer side and the enterprise IT side.
So I'm gonna jump. Normally I go the Chris, Jonathan, Solomon, Chris, Solomon, Jonathan, but we're coming close to the end of this episode, and we have a question from the audience that that's worth covering here before we wrap up. And he asks, how relevant is using the Mara toolkit, so mobile application reverse engineering and analysis toolkit, to deal with some of these problems? And so, Chris, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, there are a lot of great open source tools out there for security experts and pen testers to leverage. But I think, and when we're looking at the scale and speed of the mobile space, doing any sort of manual inspection across, your entire fleet of applications, or even the application you're developing yourself, you will quickly run into time and money constraints there. So, even just doing a manual inspection on one app, one version of one app, pen tester will typically take between 1 and 2 weeks to do that. But at that time, you're probably already releasing your second version, or you've already released your second version. And that's only if you have one app. If you have one Android and one iOS app, and if you have 2 Android and 2 iOS apps, you can see how the problem gets very hard very quickly using some sort of open source manual toolkit. So that's why our solution was built, is to enable enterprises, small businesses, everyone across the board to take advantage of some of this intelligence, but at scale. And again, there are other solutions out there, but of course, Qwak is the best.
Jonathan, thoughts on Mara, on the Mara toolkit?
I think just to reiterate a little bit what Chris was saying is, like, a lot of times security teams have a ton of things already on their plate, and we're always looking for efficient ways to do due diligence and security assessments. And so there are tools out there that we could use, but it takes time to kind of build up that expertise. And then it takes some, probably my biggest challenge in implementing security is the bandwidth of my people. And so I'm always looking for tools that work effectively and give me a good solution without a huge learning curve and give me the result I'm looking for. So yeah, we could do probably every function using open source software, but there's no way I could do that with the amount of personnel resources I have. And so a lot of times it's just looking at how can I most effectively do this with a tool.
Solomon, any opinions on that?
Yeah, absolutely correct. Sometimes it could also be a business decision. If you've got this one application that is brings in 90% of your revenue, and you wanted to provide extra confidence to your customers, you could run that analysis on your application and make the report available to them, so they know that it's been tested with a well-known open source framework. Another thing is, if you are consuming a mobile application that weighs heavily on your risk register, you want to take the time to do that analysis, because what the developers publish may be different from what the application is actually doing. So that's when that extra due diligence comes in. It depends on how much that application affects your overall risk posture.
Yeah, and the most nefarious applications are not going to publicize what information they're taking either.
Yeah, yeah.
This is true. This is true. So, Chris, what role do app developers and MSSPs play in maintaining and enhancing application security in this evolving regulatory environment?
Yeah, I mean, as I said a little bit earlier before, Apple and Google themselves have created a pretty awesome infrastructure and set of tools for developers to leverage in order to make themselves secure. Some of these other issues I had talked about at the beginning about, TikTok using a permission from another app. There's even ways for that app to protect itself and prevent TikTok from doing that. You can sign a signature permission, so it has to be signed by your same certificate in order to access that data, for example. So I think the first key step is understanding that scope of what's available to me as a developer, and then doing your best effort to implement that, whether that's wholly by yourself with assistance of tools like Quokkas to help you identify your weak areas and correct them. But it is a very large role because most of the tools are in place for you to be safe and secure in your app development. And it just takes the time and commitment from the individual and the organization to be, as our friends at CISA say, secure by design.
Very good. Jonathan, anything to add to that?
I was just thinking about, oftentimes when we're using a new item, application or software, we sign off the user agreement, the terms and conditions, and where the data goes. And a lot of times, the most important information is buried, on page 37, and no one really goes through those. And I think finding a way when people use these applications to make them, easily aware that, hey, your information is going to places you may not want it to, and making people understand that, and in a simple way that doesn't require them to navigate a bunch of legal language, would probably move us forward by leaps and bounds in terms of user education.
Yeah. So, Solomon, do you want the final word?
Yes. That final point is actually a fantastic point because transparency is very, very important. And everyone is scared of legalese. So the app owners have got to make those permissions easy to understand, easy to administer, and have got to be very transparent about what the applications do and what they do not do. So I think the industry has got to come together on this point. And in terms of how applications talk to each other and integrate, there's got to be an industry standard for exchange of information and privacy, where we are able to maintain the original original consent by the user, and not have intercompany agreements that violates the original intent of the user, or will lead to their data being lost through a side channel. So, but right now the industry has not come together on that case yet. So maybe the MSPs, the hyperscalers, the large organizations need to build a framework that everyone can be tested against, and then we can see some progress in mobile security.
So great discussion. We are unfortunately at time, so I need to wrap it up. But big thanks to Quokka for sponsoring this, and Chris, Jonathan, Solomon, just a great discussion. And a big thanks to our audience. We got some very good questions in there, a nice engaged group. So we'll see you all next time. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.